So if you're struggling to figure out what you want to do with your life, I'm going to explain to you exactly how you can turn those dreams into goals using advice from Warren Buffett. What city should we live in? What job should I do? What business should I start? What department should I work in? We tend to organize our life around the future, and yet the future is something extremely fickle. I don't know about you, but if I look at myself, what I thought my future would look like 4 years ago is completely different to what it is now. And yet we can't get around it. It brings us guidance and direction to have this feeling that we're working towards something. But whenever I then start assessing at all the possibilities I have, as much of a luxury as it is, it overwhelms me to try and figure out what stuff I wanted to work on first. Usually I end up wanting everything now. So if you're struggling to figure out what you want to do with your life and are overwhelmed by the endless possibilities, in this episode, I'm going to explain to you exactly how you can turn those dreams into goals using advice from Warren Buffett. And I'm gonna start this story with a quick explanation about me camping. Because you see, I used to think that I'd love camping. Now, I don't mean the glamping that you see these days with fancy beds and like a shower in your tent and a barbecue outside your tent. No, I mean like die hard, drop me in the middle of nowhere, build my own tent, hunt my own food, and build an own fire kind of camping. Until I tried it. I ended up getting stung by mosquitoes the entire night, my air bed ended up deflating, and on top I couldn't start myself a fire, so I ended up just being cold, depressed, and hungry in the woods for the entire evening. As you can probably tell by the frustration in my voice, it wasn't for me. But guess where I got the idea to do just that? From watching a YouTube series. And what I realized in this analogy is that we often mistake other people's dreams as our own, because social media shows us the highlight reel that it could potentially be. But if I would have taken the time to look at my own strengths and just what I generally know about myself, I probably would have realized that this wasn't gonna work. Because you see, I don't enjoy sleeping on airbeds. I'm not a massive get my hands dirty kind of guy. I hate mosquitoes, and if I don't have a lighter, I have no clue how to get a fire started. Now, luckily for me, that was only one day, but I found the analogy nice because some people spend years chasing other people's dreams and end up breaking themselves down in the process. So that's why, knowing that about myself and struggling with that myself, I wanted to figure out exactly which dreams are my own and then figure out how I could turn those dreams into goals. And this is where the advice by Warren Buffett came in. Starting with step 1. Write down 25 things that you want to achieve in life. Some examples of things that were on my list was start a retreat center, become financially independent, live the van life, work at a surf school. Now really try and fill this list as far as you can. And then in step 2, what you're going to do is pick the 5 which speak to you the most. And I don't want you to move on to step 3 until you've actually eliminated it down to 5. If you're struggling to do this, what I want you to do is get more specific with the dream. One thing I hear quite a lot from my coachees is that they want to travel the world. So what I then tend to do is ask them the question, okay, if you want to travel the world, where do you want to travel to? How do you want to travel there? Do you want to travel by van, bus, plane, ship? You name it. Why do you want to travel the world? Would you consider your life a failure if you don't travel the world? And often what we find is that it's not necessarily them wanting to actually travel the world, but it's more so them wanting to enjoy the benefits that come with traveling the world and forgetting about the downsides. And the question then becomes is that travel the world dream still worth it over something else potentially more valuable? It was at this point though that Warren Buffett's advice ended, and it left me with a list of dreams I have, but still quite vague on how I actually would now go on to achieve them. So I've added 2 more steps and a bonus tip on how you can now turn this list of dreams into goals. Because in phase 3, similarly to cutting it down, we're going to get extremely specific with the dream.
If you're anything like me, you may have spent months, to some cases years, trying to figure out what your passion is. You've eventually figured it out and are contemplating making the jump. In doing so, one of the first things you are faced with when building a new business or even being a creator is finances. Now, the select few love this part. I personally do not. So luckily, I'm very proud to announce today that I have a sponsor who is able to fix this problem for you. For the sharp listeners, you may know them from episode 30, Edwin from Moneybird. They decided to sponsor this podcast today. Now, I know that when I started with my business 4 years ago, I was super overwhelmed by all the things I had to do, from sending invoices to doing my taxes. It was all a lot and all very confusing and almost made me stop. Moneybird aims to automate the financial processes, such as sending invoices, such as sending reminders for invoices, such as giving you exactly how you need to fill in your tax overview. So if you're a starting entrepreneur or creator in the Netherlands, I'd absolutely recommend using Moneybird. I'll add the link to their website in the description down below. And with that being said, let's get back into today's show.
First of all, look at the list that you've created and see if there are any that you could combine in order to make some sort of unique dream. For example, if I had in my list, I want to write a book and I want to start a podcast, I would write a book about the podcast. And therefore I can actually kill two birds with one stone and either allow more space for another dream to come into my list or just have a unique angle to approach a dream I have. And after that, we're going to get extremely specific with the dreams to turn them into goals. Let me again explain using an example of my own. I want to build a successful podcast. The question to me then arises, what does success look like? Is that 10,000 listeners, 15,000, a million? At what point have I achieved success? So with that being said, I ended up creating the Build a Successful Podcast into build a podcast that has an active average listenership of 10,000 people per episode on the topic of solving the quarter life crisis and building a life you love. What I've done is I've given myself a point to work towards to. Once I have achieved this 10,000 average listenership, I can question for myself, one, if I'm still happy in the role that I'm in, and do I want to continue or do I want to pursue another dream that I have on my list? However, should I want to continue pursuing this dream, I have to take into account that it goes at the cost of another dream. Because one of the biggest things that I find myself running into time and time again is wanting everything right now. But that is neither helpful nor realistic. And what I mean by that is we can assume that we want to build an episodical career. This assumes that you have a 40-year time span to spend on your career, split it up into however many dreams you have. So for quick math purposes, let's say you have 4 dreams, that means you have 10 years per dream. And you map them out where they logically make sense on your career timeline. If I had own a restaurant, this is something which usually takes a lot of financial risk and is something that may be smarter when I have a bit more business experience. And on top, it's not physically intensive. Therefore, it makes sense to move this dream towards my late 30s, beginning of my 40s. However, if we look at a podcast, this is something which is pretty high risk with relatively little certainty. So for me, it makes sense to do this when I also still have relatively little financial demands, meaning at the beginning of my career. Therefore, the podcast goes to the beginning. And then I can start mapping out the goals that I have according to where they logically make sense on my career timeline, rather than wanting one job or one business or one specific whatever to fulfill all the needs that I have. And with that, you should be able to map out exactly which dreams come first and which come later, and approximate time you would need to achieve them, giving you a starting point to stop thinking about all the other things that you want to achieve, because that will come, and rather start focusing on the one which is probably the closest to your career timeline and where you are at now. But that does lead us to the last bonus tip, and maybe even the most important tip of them all, that you won't be able to achieve any of these dreams. This entire process will have been useless if you don't actually try. And I'm not saying it's going to work out. It might not. I'm also not saying that it's always going to be a joy, but the chance that it works out, and for me, the comparison of doing this over the safe route, and for me that translates into the 9 to 5, this always outweighs it, even with the risk, because even if it all dies tomorrow, I would not regret having even tried. And from all of the podcast guests I've spoken to by now, and all of those that I asked the question, if it were to fail tomorrow, would you regret having tried? Even the ones that did fail still don't regret having tried. So for me, that has always been a big guidance in order to say, chase your dreams no matter what. You will be more thankful in the process either way. And with that being said, I hope that you managed to give yourselves a bit of clarity. It certainly helped me. Let me know if it helps you. Let me know what 5 dreams you end up going for. I'd be fascinated to know. And just a quick favor to ask before I sign off for today. It would help me out a ton if you would just smash the subscribe button, and you would not only help me, but now also Rue, Elliot, and Gabriela continue to fulfill their dream, build content on the topic of the quarter life crisis to help as many people as possible solve their quarter life crisis. And with that being said, I want to thank you for listening, and I will see you again next week with another guest podcast. Thanks so much.